Hello and welcome once again to the Liberty Ginger podcast. You are listening to episode number 5. I am your host, Mike Ursery, and I am freezing. Yes, it is cold. It is mid-November. Well, actually, I guess it's really towards the end of November. But we are in between Halloween and Thanksgiving, and we already have winter. I've already gotten snow. I've already gotten sub-freezing temperatures. I don't know what is going on with Mother Nature. Winter has arrived early. Last winter, went to the end of April, overstayed its welcome, and left late. Mother Nature, I don't know what's going on with you, but please, straighten yourself out. But I won't go on any more about that. People aren't listening to this podcast because they want to hear about the weather. I know this. Also, chances are the weather has you feeling just as miserable as me, and you really don't want to hear about it. So instead, we'll talk about, like we always do, the news cycle from the previous week. And now, you might have seen one story about an incident that happened in Kansas City of this volunteer charity organization feeding the homeless. The Kansas City Health Dept put a stop to it because this group did not have a permit. So, and what they did was they collected the food, they put it in bags, and to ensure that no one went back and tried to get the food later, they poured bleach all over it. Now, we are going to get into that, but first, something else I want to get into before then. That story that I was just talking about, I thought was going to be the most ridiculous thing I talked about on this episode, but it is not. Instead, the award for the most ridiculous thing from the previous week came in almost literally at the last minute. It was late Friday afternoon. This California congressman named Eric-Swalwell, he's a Democrat from California's 15th congressional district, just elected to his 4th term. He put out a tweet, and, well, first, I'll go a little bit more into context with this. He originally wrote an op-ed that was on usatoday.com where he talks about wanting to implement what he calls a military-style weapons ban. And what he proposes in this op-ed is that he wants to bring back the assault weapons ban that went from 1994 to 2004. But he wanted to go a little further with it because his reasoning was that if you just reinstated that assault weapons ban, all that would do is just prevent the future sales of assault weapons. But it would not do anything about the assault weapons that people currently own. So he proposed a buyback program and at the same time prosecute those who refuse to sell their assault weapons. So later on, Congressman Swalwell has this Twitter exchange, and it starts out with this man named John Cardillo. He is the host of a show on Newsmax TV called America Talks Live. And what he did was he had tweeted out the link to this USA Today op-ed, and he said, "Make no mistake, Democrats want to eradicate the Second Amendment, ban and seize all guns, and have all power rest with the state. These people are dangerously obsessed with power." Another person quote tweets that, a man named Joe Biggs. He is, based on his Twitter bio, he is a combat vet, and he spent time with the 82nd Airborne. And he quote tweets this, and he says, "So basically, Representative Swalwell wants a war, because that's what you would get. You're out of your mind if you think I'll give up my rights and give the government all the power." Eric Swalwell replies to this man, and what he did was he just claimed the crown for the most obnoxious tweet. This trumps anything that President Donald Trump has ever tweeted. Here's what he said. He says, "And it would be a short war, my friend. The government has nukes. Too many of them, but they're legit. I'm sure if we talked, we could find common ground to protect our families and communities." What? What? First off, what was this guy thinking? And this wasn't just something that he just said off the cuff. No, he actually typed this out. He typed it, read over it, and then he hit the tweet button. Are you kidding me? A sitting congressman actually threatened to nuke American citizens. This is just absolutely amazing. As for the last part of his tweet where he says, I'm sure if we talked, we could find common ground. How do you find common ground with someone who just threatened to nuke you? Seriously. How do you find common ground with someone who just threatened to obliterate you with a nuclear weapon? But I can tell you this. This man, by saying this, he just did 3 things. 1, he just showed everyone that he is completely insane and unfit to be in the United States Congress, first of all. Second, he showed just how psychotic people in government can be, and he showed why it is a horrible idea to give some people power, and to not just give them power, but let them have as much power as they have. And not only that, but they're constantly expanding that power, and people let them do it. And now you have this. And third, and most importantly, this man just confirmed the fear of every pro-Second Amendment person in this country. Bravo, Congressman. Bravo. You did it. Congressman Swalwell, of course, tried to explain why he tweeted what he did. He had another Twitter exchange later with a man named Joe Walsh, who is the host of the Joe Walsh Show, which also appears on Newsmax, where Walsh had quote tweeted his nuke tweet, and he said, "If you don't turn over your guns, we'll nuke you," is definitely a reasonable argument to make. And he replies and he says, "Joe, it's sarcasm. He said he's going to war with America if gun legislation was passed. I told him his government has nukes. God forbid we use sarcasm." First of all, if a sitting congressman brings up the fact that the government has nukes in response to someone talking about going to war over gun confiscation, the first thing I'm going to think is not sarcasm. The first thing I'm going to think is everything that I just laid out. Of course, Walsh even quote tweets that tweet, and he said, "Eric, I get that your use of nukes was sarcasm, and yep, Twitter doesn't do nuance. But understand how many of us gun-clinging Americans recoil at the word confiscation, and will do whatever we have to do to defend our guns against a government that would take them. Thanks." Oh boy. He went straight for the Joker card. Imagine this is a game of spades and you're playing with jokers, and the big joker is the highest card in the deck that beats every other single card, and that is the card that he went with, talking about going straight to nukes. Didn't even say anything about the military. He didn't even say about anything about what the military has as far as high-powered machine guns, claymore mines, drones, tanks. No, he went straight for nukes. Amazing. And that is how the week ended. That is one way to end the week, I guess, and I'm sure everyone's going to be talking about that over the weekend and probably even into next week. But, wow, that, like I said, that trumps anything that Donald Trump ever tweeted. His tweet of calling Stormy Daniels a horse face, that went viral really quick, but that has nothing on this. It's nowhere near this. That tweet, I'm sure, has been screenshot enough times, and people are passing it around to each other, and I'm pretty sure that at first glance, people are going to look at this and they're going to say, "Is this real?" is going to be the first words out of people's mouths if they hadn't seen this already. Or the first time they saw it, that's probably exactly what they said. Is this real? Yeah. Is that real? A sitting congressman threatening to, well, sarcastically threatening to nuke American citizens who talk about going to war over gun confiscation? Yeah. Is this real? Yes. Unfortunately, it is. Now, this guy at least was taking the time to explain why he tweeted that. But you have to understand here is that he can only do this one tweet at a time. Meanwhile, there are millions of tweets about what he said. And you know that people on the right are sharing this all over the place. It is going up everywhere. This guy, I understand, okay, he was being sarcastic, but come on, man. You talked about nuking American citizens. You had to have known. You had to have known what was going to happen with that. Wow. So that was the end of the week. Now let's rewind back to the beginning of the week. And this particular incident, this is a thing that happened in Kansas City. You had some conflict between the Kansas City Health Department and this volunteer charity group called Free Hot Soup Kansas City. What this group does is they go around and they feed homeless people around the city. You have a bunch of volunteers who get together. They make hot food. They make soup. They make chili. On this particular day, what they had was hot soup, chili, and sandwiches. And they volunteer their time, volunteer their resources, and they feed the homeless. Sounds perfectly harmless, right? Well, according to the Kansas City Health Department, it was not. Now, this particular incident happened on November 4th, but it didn't really start going nationwide until Monday, November 12th. And this is from Reason.com. Story written by someone named Joe Setyan. And he starts out with, the Kansas City Health Department hasn't made it easy for free hot soup. The group's volunteers showed up at 4 locations November 4th to serve food to the homeless. But city officials had been monitoring the group's social media posts, and they knew where to go to try to stop the sharing. The Kansas City Star reports that chili, sandwiches, and soup were dumped in bags and soaked in bleach to make sure no one went back to try to recover it. So, first of all, you have a department of government that is monitoring a volunteer charity group's social media just to know where they were going to go. That's creepy. And second, you have all of these homeless people who think that they're going to get a hot meal, and all of a sudden that food is dumped in bags and bleach is poured on it right in front of them. All because they didn't want these homeless people to come back and try to recover the food later on. Why? And later on in the article, it talks about how the health department said that this group did not have a permit. And they go through and they describe about how as long as you're not charging money for food, the permit is free of any charge. And the reason for it, the reason for the permit is because they're worried about food safety. According to a gentleman named Rex Archer, who is the director of the Kansas City Director of Health, he said the city can't allow food to be served publicly without affirming that the preparers are trained in safe food management, proper temperature controls, and other defenses against contamination, and have an inspected kitchen. So if people want to take it upon themselves to go out and try to do a selfless act for strangers they don't know through all of this first, and I understand the whole reason behind this, they want to make sure that people aren't eating unsanitary food, but still, if you're going to go so far to stop it that you're going to monitor someone's social media, and then you're going to put the food in bags and pour bleach all over it in front of the people who are waiting to eat it, not only is that heartless, but that seems like a real overreach to me, that they will go that far. And this is a Department of Health that's doing it. A lot of times when we're talking about government overreach and government intrusion, usually we're talking about it at the federal level. But this is a department of a local government in Kansas City that did this. And if you go a few paragraphs down in the Reason article, it says the organization operates its events as potluck meals among friends and thus argues it doesn't need a permit. We don't have to have a permit to go have a birthday party in the park with our family and friends, one of the group's leaders, Rachel Burnett, points out to WDAF. Why would we have to have a permit to come here and have a picnic with our friends in the park? Well, she does make a pretty good point. I'm sure that the health department is not going to go to every single birthday party that's happening everywhere and inspect the food there and ask them if they have a permit. You don't even need a permit to have a birthday party in the park. And now she's talking about how they're basically having a large get-together in a city park and they're just handing food out. Another person, Amy Bell, who's an attorney that volunteers with the group, in the recent article she says, "It's our right of freedom of association and freedom of speech. And for many people here, it's a freedom of religion issue, that their religion dictates that they come and share their food and help the needy." And, wow, okay, that she makes a pretty valid point as well. But let's take all of that out of the equation for a minute. Let's take away the freedom of expression, the freedom of speech, the freedom of association, the freedom of religion. Let's take all of that out for a second. If you want to just go out and feed someone that you know is starving, someone that you know who has nothing, you want to give them some of what you have to obtain a permit, which basically means you have to receive permission to go out and do that. Does anyone else find it ridiculous that you have to receive permission to share with someone who has nothing? Like, if it pleases the crown, I would like to go out into the public and share compassion with my fellow human beings. Does anyone else find that absolutely ridiculous? And this isn't the only such case of something like this ever happening. Reason points out some other examples. One example they point out is something that you might remember from 2014, where two ministers and a person who's 90 years old were arrested in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, because they were feeding the homeless. In January 2017, in Tampa Bay, Florida, police were caught on video arresting several members of a group called Foods Not Bombs, a group that seeks to end poverty and war, according to Reason. Their crime? Also serving hot meals without a permit. This is just amazing. You have people living on the street. They have nothing. They're starving. You have people who obviously are concerned about this, and they want to go out and do something about it. And they feel that the best thing that they can do is go out to these people and offer them a free meal. And the government has a problem with this because of permits, because they didn't request a permit. And, you know, it's not just a thing of feeding the homeless. You can feed anybody. You can bring people into your home and you can feed them there. The government's not concerned about that, but they're concerned about you giving unsanitary food to the homeless. Like, you do realize that homeless people dig out of dumpsters, right? So I don't understand this. But the thing I find most ridiculous about this particular incident in Kansas City is that they poured bleach all over the food right in front of the people who were expecting to eat it. That is completely heartless, in my opinion. That is, I don't even know if heartless is a good word to describe that, but that is just horrible. And something else about this too is a lot of times libertarians will have discussions with people who aren't libertarians, and they will talk about charity versus government. And libertarians, of course, advocate for charity. Libertarians are very charitable. And then you have the people who talk about how charity is not enough, but you also need government assistance involved at times too. And that's when people get into debates about charity versus taxation and charity versus coercion. But then here you have a case where government is impeding charity. Government is preventing charity from happening, and they're citing health. Let these people eat. let people feed them. Let people be compassionate to one another. Let people be charitable if that's so what they want to do. Why do you, first of all, have to ask permission to do that? It seems like you have to ask permission to do so many things nowadays, and being charitable and feeding someone who is hungry just happens to be one of them. Can we stop this? Can we not do that? Let people be free. Let people be charitable if they choose to be. And my gosh, let homeless people eat. Come on, man. When a volunteer group isn't allowed to go out and feed the homeless of their own accord without the government being involved, that's when you really have to ask the question if the government is way too intrusive. And you can ask that question about so many things, but this is an instance where we're talking about kindness and human compassion. And I've heard one phrase so many times, kindness doesn't cost a thing. But apparently, if people are being arrested and people are having food that they were going to give away, if they're having it confiscated, well, apparently kindness does cost something. Don't you think? In last week's episode, I was very brief about CNN's Jim Acosta, and the only thing that I said about him was that he was placed on a toddler timeout, and I'm sure everyone is well aware by now, but last week, Jim Acosta had his White House press pass pulled, and the reason they did it is because they said that he had assaulted a White House intern. I'm sure everyone saw the video clip of the lady trying to take the microphone away, and well, he really did not assault her. And they showed this video where they kind of like slowed it down and they sped it up, but they used that video as the reason why they pulled his White House press pass. First of all, let me say, I think that was a very bad move by the White House. And like, in my personal opinion, yeah, they could have pulled his pass, but they didn't have to do it for that reason. The reason they couldn't do it for is because he was creating chaos right there in the White House press briefing room, where he was asking Donald Trump so many questions. Trump was done taking his questions, and he was ready to move on to another reporter. And Jim Acosta just kept on going and going and going. And then he and Trump had that exchange where Trump told him that he was very rude and a very horrible person. Yes, he actually said that to his face. And, you know, they could have just used his antics and his behavior as a reason for it and not use that video. The video, of course, well, at first it was a GIF posted by the Daily Wire. Paul Joseph Watson of InfoWars had taken the GIF and converted it to an MP4, and this was all verified by BuzzFeed. And then the White House used that video that he produced as the reason for pulling Jim Acosta's White House press pass. So the only thing I said about it last week was that he was placed on a toddler timeout. And I don't know what you think about Jim Acosta. I think he is a pretentious ass, to be honest with you. I am not a fan of Jim Acosta at all. I don't like seeing him in action. I don't like seeing the way that he acts. He brings a lot of attention to himself. And the reason why he does that is because he just seems like a person who loves the attention. He loves to be the center of attention. And that's why he acts the way he does. Now you might have your own opinion of Jim Acosta. This is my opinion of Jim Acosta. And like, do you remember when he was on Stephen Colbert's show and he posted a picture of himself on Twitter? It was a picture, it wasn't a selfie. It was a picture of him looking at himself in a mirror, almost like he was adoring himself. That is what I think about Jim Acosta. He is self-centered, he craves attention, and he will do anything to get it. After his press pass was pulled, Acosta and CNN filed a lawsuit against the White House to have his press pass returned, and that decision was handed down on Friday, November the 16th. It was handed down by U.S. District Court judge in Washington, D.C. That judge's name is Timothy J. Kelly, and he ruled that the press pass be returned to Acosta immediately. And now, one thing about this is that this is not an end to this controversy between CNN and the White House, because this is just the first ruling that was handed down. There's more to this case, and that's going to appear in court the following week. But as of now, a judge ruled that Acosta must have his press pass returned to him. And the judge, what's really interesting about this is that the judge did not say that anything about First Amendment rights being violated. Whenever the press pass was first ruled, this is what people talked about. They cited the First Amendment, freedom of the press, and we do not have a First Amendment ruling yet. That will come later on. According to the New York Times, one thing that Judge Kelly said, he said, "I want to emphasize the very limited nature of this ruling. I have not determined that the First Amendment was violated here. What was determined was that Jim Acosta's right to due process was violated, in that the White House just pulled the press pass, said nothing ahead of time, just ordered that it was revoked, and they did not issue a statement, they did not issue a reason why, and they did not give Acosta a chance to respond ahead of his press pass being pulled." So that is what he means by due process. Well, now it seems that some things are about to change, because now it appears that the White House is going to set some new rules and regulations, according to President Trump. He spoke from the Oval Office that same day. He said, "People have to behave. If they don't listen to the rules and regulations, we'll end up back in court and we will win." Sarah Huckabee Sanders also issued a statement saying that people have to show decorum. And the New York Times, of course, cites behavior from Donald Trump in the past, like bringing up how he loved that a person in Montana running for office body slammed a reporter. And of course, he said so many things about the press. Most notably, he said that the press is the enemy of the people. He really needs to stop doing that. A sitting president should not be saying that about the press. I understand that he thinks that the press is unfair to him, but Mr. Trump, please drop that line, please. But now that that ruling has been handed down, perhaps if in the event of another reporter ever has their press pass pulled, perhaps maybe this is the process that they will go through. They will first issue the statement, and then they will give the reporter a chance to respond before a final decision is made. I don't know, but that just seems to be the reasoning here. As far as the First Amendment and the freedom of the press, they are not... The White House is arguing that the First Amendment isn't being violated because they're saying that Mr. Acosta is not entitled to have a White House press pass, and I kind of agree with that. Yes, and I understand this kind of gives off the signal that the White House will try to pick and choose who does report from the White House press briefing room. I understand it kind of gives that signal, but you have to understand that even if Jim Acosta does not have a press pass, they are not preventing CNN as a news outlet from providing coverage of the White House. CNN could send another reporter there. So, and Jim Acosta personally is not entitled to a White House press pass. This is just how I look at it. I'm sure next week a ruling will be handed down about this. I think that they will find that the First Amendment was not violated, and the reason why is because of what I just laid out. But that's going to be something really interesting going forward. But of course, Mr. Acosta in these past couple of weeks has done plenty of whining and crying on Twitter like he usually does, because that's just what he does. But I could tell you one thing that the White House could do going forward now that he has access to the White House once again. Whenever Sarah Huckabee Sanders does the press briefing each day, she could just not call on him. He's going to raise his hand. He's going to have questions he wants to ask, and she could pretend he's invisible. I think that would be hilarious, but I think that's one thing that she could do. Just pretend he's not there. In fact, you want to make it even funnier, call on the person to his left and the right and all the people sitting behind him because he sits in the front. Call on everyone around him, but don't call on him. She doesn't have to call on him. She can call on whoever she wants. Just, that would be funny. I would sit, I don't watch the White House press briefings each day because I think they're really boring, but I would sit and watch that just so I could watch it and laugh. I think that would be hysterical. And I would like to see his reaction too, because like I said, he loves being the center of attention. Is he going to stand up and yell and shout and demand that he be allowed to ask his questions? Maybe. I don't know. But I think that would be hilarious. So that was what we had this week. We had Jim Acosta winning his legal battle. We have the Kansas City Health Department acting as heartless as they did. And of course, we had a sitting congressman who very sarcastically, let's be sure and include that part, very sarcastically talked about nuking citizens who wanted to go to war over gun confiscation. Folks, this is episode number 5. This is the 5th week I've been doing this. It just seems like every week there is just so much to talk about. This news cycle just gets more and more ridiculous every week. But before I close, I do want to wish a happy Veterans Day, belated happy Veterans Day to all the veterans out there. That was last Sunday, November 11th. It was also the 100th anniversary of the end of World War I. So I want to wish a happy Veterans to everyone out there. Hopefully you all went out and got a free meal somewhere. Thank you, everyone, for listening to the Liberty Ginger Podcast, episode number 5. Liberty Ginger Podcast is a part of the Think Liberty Network. You can find it at most places where podcasts are hosted, to include iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, iHeartRadio. You can find us on Facebook, Think Liberty. You can find us on Twitter at Think_Liberty. You can find us on Instagram. Do a search for Think Liberty, all one word. We're also on Minds. We're on Steemit. We're also on Mastodon. Check us out. Everyone, thank you for listening.